on to enable you folk to we have a reasonable break. What time does council start? Grant?
3.
Oh, 3. Okay, cool. Yeah. Oh, we've got a meeting at 2. Right. Yeah. So we do have a reasonably full agenda. We do have some external guests in the form of our retiring auditor and our new auditor, and we have a reasonably full agenda. So we'll keep pushing on and see where we get to. We are live streamed now, and if anybody is watching, welcome to the meeting. Mel, I've got to just check. Do we have any councillors that are on screen as well? No, it's just those that are present here. That's great. We're good to go then. So can I deal first up with apologies? We have an apology, as I'm probably sure everybody knows from Nobby. He's not here. Anybody else able to stay here for the meeting? That's good. I'll move from the chair that Nobby's. Thank you, Grant. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried. For some reason, sorry, my system is not liking me here. Get one out. Thank you. I'll get back to it. Can we move, please, to the minutes of the last meeting? Held, it's not the last meeting, the 21st of March meeting minutes. No, sorry, can I just back the truck up? I've just got to get my computer system right. Going right. Are there any matters of interest that people need to declare for the course of the meeting? Anything's going to affect them? There isn't? No. I haven't been informed of any public forum, which is great. Now we can deal with the minutes of the 21st of March. I'll move from the chair that they're taken as a true and correct record. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Leslie. Is there any comment on those? Thank you to the staff that have followed up on all the action items on those. There's a fair bit around health and safety, and we've got a fair bit on health and safety, Andrew and team, coming up in the meeting, which I appreciate that. I think the rest has been dealt with. I'll put the motion that they're true and correct. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, it's carried. Can we then move, please, to the minutes of our meeting of last Monday? Is that the 15th? It was, wasn't it? The extraordinary meeting of the Risk and Assurance Committee. Again, I'll move from the chair that they're taken as a true and correct record. Thank you, Ross. Is there any debate on those, accuracy or correctness? There being none, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, it's carried. Thank you. We move then on to item 6, which is the joint PCBU duties. A very interesting one. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate your presence, buddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just take the report pretty much as read. Just to put it back into context, councillors might remember this issue came up as part of the approval for some road closures, and then an ongoing discussion that was raised around council's obligations where roads are closed for events, and then more broadly council's obligations where events occur or indeed work is undertaken on any parts of land owned or occupied by council, and the overlapping duties that might arise in those circumstances. At that stage, we indicated that a report would come back just to highlight what those overlapping duties are and where they might arise. We've done a little bit of work in that space, as the report sort of highlights. And I suppose from a council perspective, the key message that I'm trying to get across in the risk space, both to this committee and back through to the organisation, is that whatever approach we should take, it should be consistent across all aspects of the organisation. Yeah. And so to a certain extent, this report might seem to be a little bit critical, but it's critical at a council level, not necessarily at an individual area level, because there's some areas that have thought about what they do in this space. Whether or not it's to council's risk appetite is a different question, but they are doing good work in that space as far as they have been instructed by council. But I think what the report's highlighting is that across the organisation we need to be consistent and probably need to be more aware of these risks and how we're managing them. So, got any questions in relation to that?
Thank you, Andrew. It was a always revealing to read, and also actually I appreciate you including the real examples of both Whakaari and Thames Coromandel, and the collapsed bouncy castle or whatever it was. It was something more than a bouncy castle. Okay, do we have questions for Andrew? Yes, Rangi.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I want to raise the issue of traffic management and how it applies to, obviously, we do a lot of roadworks. And it appears to me, just looking at the traffic management installations currently in place for the work that's being done, it seems to have gone to an extreme, over the top sort of management. An example is D Street. There's some pipe work being done, the Rankstone pipeline up by the church, and yet the traffic management plan extends all the way just shy of Herbert Street, blocking off businesses on the east side. There's Z petrol station and the tyre place, and I'm just wondering, this is sort of, you know, there's 800 metres of clear space that for some reason, well, it seems like 800. I need to measure it, but it seems an over design for what's actually being done. I can't quite understand it. So how do we work with our contractors to say, woo, you know, we don't want to shut down the city?
At the highest level, I suppose this paper highlights how we work with them. We work out who's best placed to manage the risk, and that person undertakes the work that they think is appropriate to manage the risk. And it is an issue that comes up, sort of to your point, but almost a different way. And we need to be careful, and this paper tries to highlight, if we were to manage workplace health and safety with every contractor or party with whom we work, we would have 20 or 30 staff just trying to manage workplace health and safety. And so in many respects, what you're talking about there is there's a traffic management plan in place done by the contractor. We don't double guess whether or not that is correct or not, because they're the best place to manage that risk. And so if we were to go in and say to that contractor, we think you should do it differently, then that is council taking on the risk and the management of workplace health and safety in that space. And that's not something that we would ordinarily step into.
Well, the reason I'd say we would get involved is because we represent, theoretically, the governance here, the people, the owners of those businesses, and we would have to say, well, on their behalf, is this necessary? You know, prove to us that it is necessary to do the work way down here, yet you're shutting off access to everything way down here. To me, it just doesn't quite make sense. And is there other reasons, or is it an overreaction to safety? Have we got to a stage of overreacting?
I don't know whether Rangi, that's actually an easy question to
Well,
answer.
you
I
know,
think
I'm
what
not
I've
here
heard.
to ask easy questions.
Pardon?
I'm not here to ask easy questions.
No, I appreciate that, but I'm not certain if I've heard the answer correctly. That actually isn't directly for ICC to determine in this case, correct?
Okay, so
it's the person. I mean, this is the point of the paper.
Yeah.
It is the contractor, presumably in this position, who is best placed to determine what is safe, and they will be accountable for it.
We have overlapping responsibilities.
Agreed. I don't disagree with that.
And I'm talking about the overlap bit.
But
I think actually Andrew said it. Actually, you have to be careful as to what is the first role in terms of overlapping duties.
Yeah.
According to the paper, it is who is best placed to make the call.
Yeah.
That's what I've read from the paper. And I think the point you're making in the case of D Street, and I agree, I was affected by that today, Rangi, is actually it's the contractor is best placed. Michael, I think you've got a point, and then I've got Grant, and then Ria, and then Tom.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I just wanted to remind councillors that in relation to road corridor access, we play two roles in relation to that. We actually have to sign off the road access requirements under the requirements of Wakakotahi. So they have changed their approach to a risk-based approach. So they do assess each of those risk plans, and we're the administrating body in relation to signing those off. So they have come through council from that perspective, but just the difference, I guess, in this approach is we've got a set of guidelines from Kotahi that we need to uphold in relation to reviewing those plans and it is a risk-based health and safety approach that they are focusing on.
So because it's a state highway, they get involved as a third party. You have the contractor, us, and Waka Kotahi.
Through yourself, Chair, Waka Kotahi is always involved in relation to road safety access plans where we are administering their...
regardless of state highway or not?
Correct, that is correct.
Okay.
Right, I've then got Grant, please.
Yeah, so just a couple of things. Thanks, Chair. Just maybe to Ringy's point, it's just simply that we ensure that the contractors take account of the impact on businesses. That could be a simple resolution to that. But I didn't want to spend time on that. It was regards to when we would receive, you make comment around ICC to assess controls across the areas identified and report to this committee. When are we likely to receive those? I think it's really important that we have very clear timelines around when we're receiving stuff, so that we get stuff done and it doesn't get lost.
I agree. I'm always, for want of a better description, a sucker for over-committing. I have at a high level looked at what we do. I would expect I can let you know at a high level what we do at the next meeting. As for working and getting alignment across the organisation, that will obviously be a longer piece of work. But in terms of a high level summary of across the different parts of the organisation, the approach we're taking, and where we see an immediate defect, if there is any changes that we might have made at the next committee meeting, you'll be able to get that back. It's because, again, it's one of those issues. Once we've identified the issue, we can't sit on it.
No.
And so we're at risk if we think there's a failure in our systems at the moment. So we need to work on that fairly quickly.
Yeah. I think it'd be important to see a time frame, and if that needs to be extended but at least we can get some assurance that we're making progress towards understanding our risk and having measures in place to prevent them wherever possible.
I wonder, Andrew, if under the PX item we've got health and safety again as well, which is more embracive about and a follow up in effect to the reasonably vexed discussion we had at the last meeting around health and safety. Grant, I wonder if you could just keep that in your mind, and we bring that up at that stage, not because I want it to necessarily be in PX, but actually that's where we've got a stronger view, a look at more comprehensive view across our health and safety, and I think that would be useful. Ria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Corona Dermody basically asked my question.
Right, thank you. Tom.
Andrew, the paper focuses on the Health and Safety at Work Act and our role as a PCBU and accountabilities that could flow from that. But it also, in several places, talks about public safety. Am I right in this? A question, I don't know. Am I right in thinking that actually public safety is a different obligation that we have, does not fall under the Health and Safety Work Act? So, for example, if a child fell on the playground and in a playground and was injured, does that fall under the Health and Safety Work Act, or is there a separate legislation?
The short answer is yes. Users of your facilities are deemed to be, you have an obligation to anyone who attends your workplace, whether or not they're there necessarily as a worker or not. Does that make sense? And it's where it becomes quite, in a mental context, quite difficult, because you don't perceive those people to be, and it's the same issue we have with contractors. Contractors are just workers under the Act. And it's defined as people who, you have a duty to provide a safe workplace. So anywhere where you have workers, effectively the Act covers, and so people who come onto that workplace become covered by the Act.
So there is no separate legislation
There's no separate legislation. There's common law with your duties, but no Act that says either. So you've obviously got a duty, as you do on your own home, to people who come there and get injured or whatever, but there's no legislation specifically covering that.
Okay, thank you.
And I think that reflects like that Thames Coromandel case, Tom, where it was a contractor making, or an event promoter making use of public land under permission from council owned the land, and all of a sudden the child,
the person who got injured,
he's not a worker, but is on the land, is affected, and then there's a prosecution. So yes, it is a challenging area.
Mm.
Thank you for that. Do we have any other questions from folk? Yes, Rhea.
Sorry, I've just got a little thing going off the back of my head. So, with that scenario you just gave us, with this scenario being here in Invercargill at the water fountain, where that's regularly being mucked around with soap suds and what have you, and a small child falls in there and drowns, who's responsible for that?
We are. So again, you saw that case in the paper, and quite clearly that's a council duty, and it would be covered effectively under whether or not the health and start. There's civil duties, obviously, but it would be covered under the Health and Safety at Work Act, whether or not we've done everything we're required to. And to be fair, we did do some work on that, and we have got ongoing work, and it's part of the role of this committee to sort of look forward and see what our risks may be. So when there was the terrible incident in Gore, we went and reviewed a lot of our waterways and all our waterways. And so again, as part of this, we'll go back and review it and say, look, here's an incident that occurred somewhere else. Yes, we know people use it. We're not, as far as I'm aware, but we will have to investigate whether or not we're aware of similar sort of risks in terms of people getting in there or falling in there. And if we are, then we'd have to consider what we would do.
So you said that there's been some work done on that prior. So at the stage now, where's that at for that fountain?
Oh, we didn't.
Should something happen tomorrow, are we?
We didn't necessarily. I can't tell you whether we looked at the fountain in particular, but we looked at all our waterways. We had a discussion around our roles, our duties, and where they fall, because obviously there's a lot of exposed waterways in Invercargill, and so. As much as anything, we will go back because of this incident and look at our fountains again, I suspect more specifically, but we did look at it broadly. This has highlighted a different scenario. We will go back and look again and see where we're at.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Can I can't help but observe that gets us back to what's our risk appetite. If we had no risk, if we had a totally averse appetite towards risk, we'd take our fountains out. Darren.
Just following on from the fountains, it goes right down to, as Andrew mentioned, all waterways, and then we'd find ourselves having to mitigate against the streams through Thompson's Bush, you know, that have always been there. So there's got to be a degree of common sense that's measured in as well, and responsibility. But we ask the question, what else could we do? Is there anything reasonable? And that's the degree we've got to look at.
Thank you, Darren. Right, thank you for that, Andrew. I think that's that's very illuminating and very helpful as we go down our health and safety, further down our health and safety journey. So look, I don't want us to lose your point, Grant. I think that's something we'll come back to when we're in the PX paper. So we're going to receive the report. We note the overlapping duties. We note that we will receive further information on the current state of maturity regarding our obligations. And we note that the Risk and Assurance Committee will receive reports on incidences involving overlapping duties as part of normal health and safety reporting. Is somebody prepared to move that and second that, please? Thank you. I saw Rhea, I saw Tom, and thank you for the rest that also offered. Is there any debate on the motion? Being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, it's carried. Thank you. We have a verbal item, I think, at this stage on quarterly risk.
Yes, it's again through you, Chair. I apologise I didn't put anything in writing, but it's contemplating where I think we're at and where I think this committee can add some value to the organisation. I think just broadly speaking, there's a number of risks that are occurring both externally and internally within the organisation at the moment that are putting pressure on the way we do things. And I think, I suppose what I'd like to highlight is I think this committee needs to start, or I would like this committee to start looking a little bit more forward looking. We tend to be reacting to things a lot. And I think this committee, through the long-term plan and a few of those other things, has a bit of an opportunity to, for want of a better description, get ahead of the game a little bit. I think we're seeing things coming up and we're not necessarily planning for how those might play out or how they might change, and having in place appropriate controls or consideration around what we do when those risks are realised. And I think that's leaving us a little bit exposed in in a number of areas where we're seeming to be and having to be reactive because we haven't really thought through our process and our steps as well as we would like. And I think that's, I suppose, what I'd like to highlight. We're going through that as part of the long-term plan process in terms of making a lot of assumptions. And I think it's key that this committee understand the impact of those assumptions and think about if those assumptions don't pan out the way that we hope they will, what that means for us, what we're going to do, what's, for one of Michael's description, the plan B, C, D, because I think we're not necessarily seeing that at the moment. It'd be my overall comment, I think, around where we're at. Obviously, in the maturity space, we're seeing papers coming up. We're trying to improve the maturity. We've got a strong focus on health and safety at the moment, and I think that's starting to pay dividends. And as noted, we'll discuss that in the public excluded. Not because it all needs to be public excluded, but there are parts of that paper that touch on things that shouldn't be in public, and so we can release that paper afterwards if the committee so desires. But I think we've got a bit more work to do in the more general risk space to try and leverage those gains in health and safety and try and improve the organisation more generally. But I'm happy to take any questions or...
Yes, Grant.
So I agree. What I'm interested in understanding, how will the officers help us achieve that?
I think a key, I mean, from my perspective, and again, I get myself in trouble, but I think it's another key point that I want to make about this committee. This committee needs to be able to be independent. And I think I said this I've definitely said it to staff, and I'm sure I said it to councillors in their induction. This committee needs to be able to challenge both sides. And so if I was being... my comment in that space would be that staff need to be able to get away from management to a certain extent. I think one of the risks, or it's a risk, one of the issues, whatever you want to say, that we have around staff being able to give better guidance to councillors in that broader strategic context is that they're too embedded in the doing, and it's difficult for them to get their head up to be able to give you the bigger picture advice because they're stuck with the doing. And I think that it's not a question of capacity, it's a question of do they have the time and space to be able to start to give you that more forward-looking advice when we're just reacting to things all the time. And so that would be my comment. And so we're trying to, I know Michael's trying to, we're trying to clear up room for that to occur. And once that starts to occur, then you'll start to see those papers, I suspect, coming through.
Thank you, Scott.
So unless we understand our health and safety risk within our business, how possibly can we look forward strategically? And what I'm hearing, and whether I'm hearing it wrong, is that we don't fully have a good grasp of what our current environment looks like. We've got bits and pieces that we've got some clearer see-through on what our risk is, and other parts that are, almost impossible for us to understand. So my point is, until we see, and what I understand is, how will we officers enable us to be able to see a current environment, and then when we can see that clearly, then I think we can look forward with the benefit of applying legislation and near misses and other entities and those sorts of things, or councils. How would we that landscape? But I'm not confident that we have a clear view and a starting point for us to be able to assess our risk when we don't have that clear view at the start. And
I suppose in answer to that, I think you're starting to see that in the health and safety report. We do have data, we do collect data. I mean, it's the old statement, isn't it? In God we trust, everyone else bring data. We're trying to create those papers and that ability to have those decisions and have those conversations. And I think you see that quite clearly in the shift in the new paper. Obviously, we've got work going on in the background where we're trying to effectively get the one organisation model in the background, so getting that data together is easier. But in the interim, we're working with what we've got and we're improving that data collection, even though it might be manual, even though it might be a number of different sources, to try and improve the decision making and the guidance that we're able to give you in that space.
Thank you, Leslie, and then Tom.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Andrew, you mentioned assumptions that we're making. Surely we're already being alerted when we make any assumptions for the long-term plan to the possible risks of those. Are you indicating that needs beefed up from the alerting that's already present?
Yes and no. And I've had this conversation because we do tell you when those assumptions aren't holding true, but we never go back and say, what was the risk we identified? If those assumptions changed, what were we going to do? What was our mitigation? So if we make a whole assumption around interest rates, then obviously we realise interest rates, it's a big assumption, or inflation or whatever. We don't really map out and say, okay, if we're wrong on that, what does that mean? What are we going to do? What are we thinking about? And then when it comes up, and in finance and wherever else it comes up, which it does, we don't come back to risk and say, what was our plan around this? We sort of just go, oh, well, that's happened, on we go. We haven't sort of got to that point where we're actually ahead of the game and saying, well, if that happens, these are the sort of levers that we'll pull. This is what we'll do. We just get forced into a situation where we pull them. It's not to say they're right or wrong, but if we were more risk mature, we would have already thought through that, and we'd have our strategy in place. We wouldn't be sitting around the table saying, oh, we need to find X amount of dollars, which one are we going to pluck? We would have already thought, if this occurs, this is our plan. These are some options that we will go through. We'd just be a little bit more sophisticated around it. It's not that we're not doing the work at the outset. I think it's more that loop back round to when our assumptions don't hold true, what are we going to do? And then working through that a bit more methodically than I think we do at the moment. It happens, but it's almost happening, by chance is the wrong word, it's just happening in the absence of a real plan around it, I suppose would be my comments.
Okay, so you're saying to some extent what we need is a closing of the circle. Is that something that you would suggest we should do the moment we have those risks highlighted against the assumptions we're making? Are you saying that should be the trigger for us to go that extra step?
So implicit in any plan is a whole heap of assumptions that, and part of risk management is to ensure that we achieve our outcomes, and part of that is to try and hold us within our assumptions as best we can. Some of them will always change, but if our assumptions changed, then we may or may not need to change our plan. And we hear and tell you that the assumptions, or that our assumptions are no longer valid, but we don't necessarily go back and immediately say, what does that mean for our plan to achieve the outcomes we wanted? And so as soon as we vary from the assumption we made, it should loop back and there should be a discussion. What does that mean? Are we going to change anything? What do we need to do because our assumption has proven wrong? Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah,
and there's some real key assumptions we make that then, and look, it's part of one of my gripes around a long-term plan more generally. We make this plan and then we put it on the shelf. We do a lot of work to make all these assumptions when we build our plan. Do you know what they are? Have you ever seen them again? I'm not being, but that's that loop. Our assumptions underpin everything we're trying to do, yet we don't go back and say, was our assumption right?
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Tom?
Sandra, I think that last discussion was very helpful because when you expressed the concern in very, very broad general terms, I must admit I was really struggling to get the point. However, I do observe that virtually every paper which comes to this comes to this council, includes a risk statement. Pretty much every one includes a risk statement. Surely that is a vehicle for providing that kind of, let's say, range of possible outcomes and provide that forward-looking opportunity. So as I was listening to you, I was wondering what it was that you were proposing that we do differently, because we already do that. Do you just think we should do it better? Or?
It's almost loops back to my earlier comment in response to Councillor Dermody. You see this, but you see it in a different context. So when you're seeing those risk statements at finance and insurance or at council or wherever, you don't necessarily focus on the risk. And it's, again, where I started, this committee, its focus is risk. And so in terms of really identifying and being able to tease out those issues, you are more likely to get a better discussion here. Yes, they should be highlighted everywhere, but at certain times, significant changes, this committee should agree these are the sort of things that should come back to us. And that's what the risk framework's trying to do, where things get to a certain level of risk or we're outside our tolerance, they come back to this committee. Yes, it would still be highlighted in the other paper, but you won't necessarily get the same discussion about them in that forum.
Thank you, Rangi, and then Ria.
Look, I just want to get back to health and safety and the safety of humans. I just want to question the WorkSafe guideline thing you've got attached in here, and it talks about what does reasonably practical mean, and this is the ways of managing risk, and it says here you first do what is reasonable to eliminate the risk. If the risk can't be eliminated, then you must minimize it. Now, that acknowledges there is still a risk. And are we happy that a contractor would still continue on a job knowing there is risk? Because if it turns pear-shaped, WorkSafe won't be going back to their guideline and saying, oh, yeah, no, that fell under that, we won't prosecute you. They will be prosecuting us because of that element of risk. So where do we sit on that? What is our tolerance when it comes to this grey area that is identified clearly in their own literature? If the risk can't be eliminated, then you must minimize it. Okay, so you do all you can to minimize it, but it still acknowledges that that risk is very much real. So do you just walk away and say, no, we're not doing that job because of the risk? Or do we proceed and face the music if it does go a bit wrong?
Well, I think this comes back to the Chair's comment and the discussion we've been having for some time around whether or not Council has a risk appetite for injuries at work, let's put it that way. And the short answer is we must, because we do things. We can't eliminate all risks. And so it's a question of assessing what is reasonable. And there's guidance, there's lots of reviews around it, but noting that the primary obligation is to eliminate the risk. And so, again, we need to challenge ourselves around what is necessary and what we should do to eliminate the risk. It's only once you can't do that that it becomes what you then do subsequently. And I think often people miss that step, but the Act is quite clear. It's eliminate first, and only if you can't eliminate should you then have a tolerance for an ongoing risk.
But that puts us in that prosecution area, clearly. Because what they would say is that, we both say, us and the contractor, we did everything to minimise it, but obviously we didn't do enough because the mistake wouldn't have occurred or the accident wouldn't have happened. And then, you're in a no-win situation.
And I suppose, and this is as a litigator, I will tell you, this is what White Island highlights for you. If the consequences, and the same with Pike River, if the consequences are severe enough, then what you're expected to have done will be more. So what is expected to be done where you have a risk that someone breaks their finger versus the risk that someone dies is very different. And it's understanding, back to Councillor Dermody's point, it's understanding what your risks actually are, which then lets you make that informed decision as to how much effort you should take to.
So where does our policy sit on making that call on where it comes from a broken finger to a broken limb to death?
So
this gap.
It's all around our risk/hazard, as they use in workplace health and safety assessment. And are we truly identifying what the potential consequences are? And if you identify those correctly, then you go through the correct process. So it's, as much as anything, it's identifying the appropriate consequences which triggers what happens afterwards.
And so theoretically, if death is one of the consequences, then that thing would not proceed.
Not until we had mitigated the risk down so that there was. We can't always remove it, and the classic one that always gets used is driving a car. We can't remove the risk that someone will die in a car accident. Does that mean we don't drive cars?
I think that's simplifying a bit.
Well, no, it's an easy one for people to understand. I can use any number of examples, but that's the reality where you can't always remove the risk of death, but you still accept that you have done, as far as is reasonably practicable, what you can to reduce the risk.
Right,
No.
I'm conscious of time. Can I just keep moving on, please? I've got Rhea, Michael, then Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andrew, I'm in my head trying to understand exactly where you're coming from, and I can kind of see the picture that you're painting us. Am I right in saying you say that this council needs to act independently? We need to look at our risk and assumptions should those assumptions not pay off for us. Are you identifying that you feel that there is a skill gap within this council to be able to fulfill the ability to analyse risk as we are live ongoing? Because when you talk about mitigating risk and the assumptions, a lot of the information that we make decisions on are brought by our officers. A lot of us come from different backgrounds and we have risk experience across the fields. So I'm trying to figure out where there could be a possible solution to what you're asking us.
Look, I'd start by saying it's not that I think there's a skill gap. Not at all. I mean, council does a lot of work. The assumptions are good. Don't get me wrong. Some of them I question because they're imposed on us by the local government process. But it's more that we don't then think about what changes and revise our plan to achieve the outcome we're after. And that's what risk management should help you do. It's as much as it's, and this is the other bit that I'm trying to emphasise, it's around achieving outcomes as much as mitigating risk. I mean, and we focus often on avoiding a risk, whereas what I'm saying is if we sometimes revisited our plans because the assumptions have proven to need to be amended, we might then change our path sooner, is I suppose what I'm highlighting. And it's not a lack of skill, it's just because the issues are raised, but what I'm challenging is whether or not they're raised in a context that enables you to have the right conversation. And that's why I'm saying this committee, because this committee is around what's the risk? Okay, we've got an assumption, the assumption's proven false. What's that mean? What are we going to do? That's what this committee thinks about. Finance and Assurance says interest rates have changed, my budget's changed, let's have a look at it. It's just a different focus. It's a subtly different lens. And that's all I'm really saying. I think the issues have been raised, but I don't think they necessarily come back to this committee in the right way. and particularly in that strategic space. I think this committee's been quite risk management looking rather than strategic, objective focused.
Thank you for that, Rhea. Michael, you got a comment?
Yes, thank you through yourself, Chair. Just want to highlight two things. One about the roading side of it. Look, Kotahi has a zero harm policy in relation to it, and that's why their road management plans are quite excessive in relation to that, because they are focusing on that. While they've got that approach, there's still going to be harm. There's always risk associated to everything, and that's why they try and minimise access into those corridors when they're trying to do those works, but they can't eliminate from that perspective. The other aspect is the council tolerance level in relation to health and safety, and in fact most other risk categories needs to be understood to give direction to staff on what mitigation measures to put in place, because that does change. I think today's discussion from Andrew's actually highlighted in relation to health and safety, how far do you go? Because if we've got no risk and no tolerance in relation to health and safety risk, it is remove fountains, it's put everyone in bubble wrap, etc. And I know that's going to the extreme, and you wouldn't want to go to that position because you can't operate. So it's what's acceptable level. When do you say to staff, we're comfortable with that level that you're monitoring to? That's some of the reporting that Andrew will be looking for in the next written report in relation to the quality risk report. Is what level is that? What tolerance is acceptable for council? Where do we pitch that? And so you can monitor that, because that's what we need from a operational point of view to be coming through. So then we can put in those mitigation measures for you to say, if this risk becomes an issue, this is the mitigation measure that will kick into action. Hopefully we don't need to use those mitigation measures and we just flow through, that risk doesn't get realised and we end up with the end result that we're after. That's the ideal solution. Just want to highlight that.
Leslie.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I was just going to make what I hope is a quick comment. It sort of ties in with what Michael has just said about levels. What Councillor Pottinger raised was the but-for argument. But for the want of a nail in a horseshoe, the war was lost. But for the starting of the troop trains at the beginning of World War I, if they hadn't been started, there wouldn't have been a First World War. The but-for argument leads into infinite regression. You can always go back to search for the nail that was missing from the horseshoe, or the point at which someone started a troop train that then couldn't be stopped. The fact of the matter is we have to be practical about what is possible, because if you take the but-for argument, you would do nothing. This council would do nothing because everything would have so much risk, so many nails that needed to be found, that you would never start any project at all. We wouldn't start our 1225 project because there's the possibility that a screw would be missing from an RSJ beam and that the roof would collapse, whatever. So what it comes down to is, if it ever came to prosecution, it is extremely rare to go back and look for the nail. There are usually plenty of other points at which the causation that led to the accident or the death can be sheeted home. To say that the but-for argument should stop us doing anything becomes a ridiculous proposition for any council. We have to be reasonable about the level of risk, and as the Act says, where we can eliminate, do it. Where we can't, mitigate. And yes, look at all the possibilities for mitigation. Try to make sure that you have not left anything open, but at the end of the day, come to a reasonable point that is defensible and means your project can keep going forward. So sorry to be a bit lengthy about it, but the but-for argument would just completely end our ability to do anything.
Thank you, Leslie. Now, Andrew, can I just ask a question, please? I'd like to wrap this up because it is a verbal report and we're a wee bit unformed. What's next? I mean, to have a quarterly risk report, we don't start with our tolerances. We actually start with what are the strategic risks. Okay? And we understand our current environment. We understand why there's still the current strategic risks that we have. We look at what we're doing and we apply them against our risk appetite. Are we within our risk tolerance or not? That's where we've got to get ourselves to. So I'm really giving you the opportunity. What's the roadmap from here so that we have a discussion about our actual risks applied against our actual risk appetite, and what are we doing about it? Can you give me a bit of confidence around what the roadmap is?
And so again, I would have written it for this one, but just was a matter of making sure that was where this committee wanted to go. But we'll have a report to that effect at the next meeting, talking about those issues and looking at some of those strategic risks. It's a little bit of a difficult time because we're in the process of reviewing all our assumptions, and so at the moment our strategy is a little bit fluid, for want of a better description. But to the extent that we can, we'll start to highlight some of those bigger ones that aren't going to be impacted by our decisions around projects so much. We can start to look at some of those underlying risks and where we're sitting, and the risk maturity is to a certain extent following the health and safety, and we'll be able to start to get some reporting on that. Have a look at ones that are well and truly outside our tolerance and what, if anything, we're doing around that.
That would be helpful. Thank you. Right. There were a couple of hands. Are they questions that need to be asked, or can I look to receive Andrew's verbal report?
Mine was just a comment, just to reassure Councillor Soper that we're looking at wood joins, not screws, for the museum.
Right.
Really pleased to hear that.
Okay. Okay. Oh, well, there we go. Brilliant. Thank you, Grant. Okay, can we move to the motion, please, which is that we receive a very helpful report from Andrew. Thank you, Ria. Thank you, Tom. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, it's carried. Thank you very much. Right, gentlemen at the back. Chris, Derek, I wonder if you're coming forward as well, but certainly you need to. Chris, thank you. And we'll move on to the audit plan for the coming financial year, which well, it's the current plan for the year that ends 30 June. So look, folk, it's great to have you two here. Often it's on the screen, and it's tremendous to be able to meet you both in person. Many of you will recognise Derek on my right, and he's probably a bit of whatever on yours, dark suit, as being our auditor who gave the opinion on the last few sets of annual reports, and Chris on his right is going to take over the new audit, and so consequently I think Chris is probably correct to invite you ultimately, once I've invited Patricia to make a couple of comments, to speak to it. So thank you for being here, both of you. Derek, obviously we've got your management report to hear about later on, which will be received as well. So Patricia, anything you need to lead off, or will I let Chris do his thing?
It might be actually easier if I let Chris actually lead off, and then I'll sort of chip in at the end, because actually, to some extent, my comments are led from the way in which we are going to do the audit this year. I will say at the start, though, that we are taking a slightly different approach and looking to, mainly since we have to come back to a 31 October adoption date. That is the statutory deadline for adoption. For council is the 31st of October, and for CCOs is the end of September. So the changes from the last couple of years have been removed. So I'll let Chris start, and then I'll jump in at the end just for something a bit different.
Right, thank you. Appreciate that. Chris, open to you. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Patricia. I will be a familiar face to some around the table, but not to all. So I'm Chris, obviously, and your appointed auditor going forward. Why I say I'm not a familiar face to some is because I've been supporting Derek for the last 2 years in the Invercargill City audit, and I've also been involved with the holdings company subsidiaries, so a bit of experience within the group there. In terms of what's in the paper, Patricia, your covering paper covers most of the things I want to talk to, so that's quite helpful. As Patricia outlined, there is 3 letters you would normally expect from us this year. Now those are the audit plan, which is in your packs, that outlines the risks and issues of the audit and their areas of focus. The audit engagement letter, which outlines my responsibilities as the appointed auditor and the council's responsibilities for the audit as well. And the audit proposal letter, which is the one you'd commonly refer to as the fee letter, which outlines our hours and expected fee. The third one is not there because the fee is currently undergoing a moderation process for the Auditor General and Office of the Auditor General, and that will come to the next meeting. In terms of what is in your packs, the audit plan itself, it's probably worth briefly talking to the first 3 risks in the plan, and then possibly just touching on some standard changes that are within the plan as well, just to highlight those to you. So in terms of the first risk, the one there is the carrying value of property, plant and equipment. This is a common risk that you see within the sector, and you've probably seen it before in terms of the Invercargill City Council. But really this is about the risk where you have revalued assets and you don't value them in 1 year. And this is about looking at whether, when assessing those assets, that they are materially similar to the value they would be had you valued them. So at the moment, management have provided an assessment around this, and we're working and engaging on this early, looking at that, and I think Patricia flagged in the paper that a roving evaluation is a possibility there. If we do get to that conclusion, that had they been valued, it would be materially different from what they carried at, triggers an off-cycle evaluation, which is where Patricia's coming from. I think that the key point there is reviewing that early and giving sufficient time should a revaluation need to happen.
Excuse me, Chris, sorry to be rude here. Can you just pull the microphone closer to your mouth, please? You've got lovely dulcet tones, but we'd like to capture them, please, if that's possible. Thank you.
Pretty softly spoken as well, so we'll get close. Also within that risk, I touch on the prior qualification and saying that will still be there, but in a reduced form in relation to the comparatives and solely to the evaluation movement. But that's a prior issue just washing its way through. The second one there on page 32 talks about group accounting and consolidation. probably the key thing there is around consistency of accounting and looking at the group as a whole and ensuring that things are accounted for and measured in the same way. So the key point that we sort of drill down on that is within the Invercargill Central Limited assets and making sure that they are held at a value that's consistent with the way council accounts for things. And also briefly we touch within the paper on possibly some related implications in relation to the loan should any assumption or input to that loan change, and that number I'm referring to the loan between council and ICL there. Probably the third risk is one that you've seen from us before as well, which is the affordable water reform. It's packaged in terms of the new form of the reforms, but you know, still a significant reform and still has a significant impact on council services. So again, this is flagging that we're expecting disclosure of the known impacts of the reform, stress known, and highlighting that we're likely to emphasise that in the form of an emphasis in matter paragraph like we have previously. So that's just there to highlight to readers that it's an important matter that they should understand when they're reading the annual report. So that's what it's flagging. I also briefly touched on a couple of standard changes. The first one there is on page 33, which is the first time adoption of a service performance reporting standard. And there's some points there in terms of some additional reporting obligations that arise as of this year. Those are probably why this is a risk. This is a risk because you know anything new is prone to error, and that's just with anything. But the key sort of new obligations there are around documenting the judgments when you're sort of measuring or defining things like you would for financial information, but equally also about trying to improve comparability so that you're able to look at performance over time as well. Just trying to get that comparability up in terms of performance reporting. And the third one's really important and provides really important information to users, which is about the linkages between financial and non-financial information. And why I say that's important to users is it's really about tying in that look at what a service costs, but equally how it's gone. So you can look at the input factors of what's gone into providing a service and then the output of how that's gone. It's just trying to tie that through the flavour of your annual report, which I think is a good move in terms of the standard. The second standard change is a bit further on, I'll find the page, is on page 40, refers to a new auditing standard. This is ISA NZ 315, and this is just highlighting to you that this is coming in effect to us. This changes the way we do certain things, particularly around our risk assessment and documentation of internal control. Has a greater emphasis on internal control documentation, but equally IT as well. There's some additional risk factors that we need to document there as well in determining what risks we see. So that's just highlighting the work will be different and more in that space. Also in your pack is the audit engagement letter, and as mentioned before, that is just outlining the various responsibilities of both of us. I don't propose to go through that in any great detail and take that one as read.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. Patricia, any comments?
My comments are probably more about the date. So for the awareness of the committee, we have already started the work, as Chris said. We've started the work on the fair value of assets, and that has been partially audited already. We have an interim starting straight after King's birthday for 2 weeks, which is longer than we have for the last 2 years, where they've typically been a 4-day interim audit, and we're trying to front load a lot of the testing work into that period on the basis that we should have more staff available. Fingers crossed on that one. The final audit starting on the 18th of September, and the audit plan notes there will be 8 to 10 auditors most weeks during that period. Just for the awareness of the committee, that is more auditors than we have accountants. So the capacity strain that goes on to the finance team during that period is significant, given that that is when we're also doing the main budgeting for the LTP. So there will be a pressure point. So we're working through. I have got plan B, C, D, we up to E yet? Maybe. So we have got some plans around how we'll do it. So that is pressure. This is not unusual in the sector, just that we're at the end because we're adopting on 31 October. It puts more pressure on us. So we are trying to front load some of the LTP stuff or free people to only do LTP. So you're only doing LTP or you're only doing annual report to do that. But just from an awareness, and with other change from prior years is that we have asked for more auditors to be physically present in Invercargill for longer, so that we don't have audit by email. And that was
okay. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate that, and Chris, thank you for that update. So I do have probably 3 key areas I'd just like to get some assurance on, Patricia, before we go through it. But I wonder if members, you have any questions. We have 2 documents in front of us, the plan and the engagement letter. Do we have any questions? Yes, Ross, and then Grant.
I'm encouraged with the forward planning and resource, so I presume that's for both sides and agreed. And I guess we know the issues up front, although there will be some that will arise as the course of the audit, because nothing ever goes smoothly. But I'm reassured that we have adequate resource and planning this year to meet deadlines.
Thanks, Ross. Grant.
Yeah, similar to Ross's comments, thanks, Chair. Probably the theme of the audit that lacked last year and hopefully is there this year is work with us. So, you know, that dialogue through an audit is valuable in terms of providing additional information required, or if the information is not quite up to spec. So it's great that you've resourced it, and hopefully, and that's my other question is just around, I've noted your comment around the pressure that's on our staff, both with LTP and this, and we'll look for some reassurances, not only from you, but from Michael, that, you know, we are fully resourcing this area because it's a very important place for us to get both those pieces right, both our audit and also our forward budgets. So we need to make sure we're across that.
Right, I had, sorry, there were, I guess, 3 key points that I was after. Well, look, one is obviously the timetable, and you guys have had, and I'm looking at both you, Patricia, and also you, Chris, have had a chance to work through that. This is achievable, and it does mean that we've got a meeting already, members, on the 31st of October by the sounds of it. I do want us to take into account, and we have seen this a couple of times from the Mayor, which is quite reasonable. I think he was here, I think I could sponsor his view. It wouldn't be that good, though, if we were meeting both as a committee and as council on the same day. I think we know that that is a view. So I just wonder whether we've taken that into account, number one. Look, I'm comfortable with the level of pre-planning, and that's tremendous. I think one question that this committee must answer on behalf of council is actually that the form and nature of the actual proposed annual report is right. So if we're only getting to see it on the in the agenda packs, it is too late for us to in effect change. So to get a sense of the shape and the feel, and I'm looking your way, Patricia, it wouldn't be unreasonable the committee sees some form of pro forma about how we intend to report. It will be absent the numbers, it'll be absent the performance measures, but it might have the tenor, the nature of what we want to say. And I'd like you to just, I'm imposing work on you, but I would like us as a committee to do it properly and have a chance to see a pro forma, which gives chance for this committee to have input to actually, is this the way we want to account for ourselves? That would make a lot of sense. 2 things that I have taken out of last year, and I just want to check. The matter of the accounting for ICL, if I've got it correctly, and the loans and the asset really tripped us up. I was going to say last year, actually it was this year. It wasn't it, unfortunately. So my concern is and again, I'm looking your way, Patricia and Michael, are we looking embracively and comprehensively at our transactions and looking at them from an accounting implication perspective. Now, I will admit ICL was an incredibly technical series of issues, but we're doing 1225. Have we thought now about what do we do about any work in progress? Have we thought about the implications of its impairment? I'm wanting to encourage management to look at the transactions we do from an end-to-end perspective, not just what number do we slot into the annual report. So I'm looking for a level of assurance that we not only are doing things like the fair valuation, but we are looking at those key transactions that occur. So that can be something that we can have a chat about, but I would be keen to see that we do. Chris, the critical thing that I learnt from last year, amongst other things, was doing stuff at the right time. So I'm hearing encouraging noises that you already have some awareness of the fair valuation steps that we've taken, and you have got the time, and probably yourself, you're the opinion giver, to look at that now.
We've been looking at the fair value assessment the last week or two. We're well progressed with that. We're talking about the implications coming out of that for the stakeholder management. I've obviously front-footed those other risks there that we're talking about and some of those accounting issues. So he's trying to do things at the right time, Bruce.
Great, that's good. That frees you and me up, Ross. Okay, and the timetable sits there, so we've got that. So look, I'm comfortable with that. We have the engagement letter. You're right, it's pretty standard, but members, I would just encourage you to recognise that we are committing to doing a lot of things in that letter. It isn't just saying what the auditor will do. It's actually indicating that we effectively are committed to good open transparency and that we will provide Chris and the auditors with all that we know. Okay, so it's a slightly solemn thing, and we've got a role to recommend that the chair does that. Now, Chris, the third one is obviously we'd normally expect the fee. And if I was being uncharitable, I would characterise you're asking us to sign up to a contract without knowing the cost. And that is a difficult position in one sense to be in. You've indicated that fees are likely to rise. Can you give me any indication?
I'd not like to prejudge a moderation process, Bruce. I think we can talk about the reasons why fees would rise, but I wouldn't want to prejudge.
Well, could you give us an idea of why fees will go up? I think it's reasonable that I'm happy to pursue, and I'm not going to countenance that we don't, unless I think we need to pass these resolutions. But I would like to have some idea about why our fees are going up. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's a historical matter, but equally also a contemporary one at the same time. So in terms of fees in the sector, I think it was flagged around lastly around a growing under recovery of audit fees over a period of time, and that leading up to a point at which the COVID pandemic came into place. At that point in time, the AG made a pragmatic call to not take that move at that point in time and effectively put a pause on increases at that time. Since that time, we're seeing increased complexity, increased standard changes, and more expectations placed on us by standard setters, as well as additional scope items too. So there really is, there's this historic pause, but equally there's other things coming in terms of complexities. And it's just trying to understand that point during COVID at which they said, no, we're holding it here is probably a key thing to understand.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm not going to ask you, as you say, to surmise what the fee might be, but Ross, you are. I don't think it's fair. I'm taking Chris at his good word. He's given us a strong indication fees are going up.
Yeah, and I understand that from professional services firms and the reasons. The other part to that, though, is efficiency and the way you plan it, so it doesn't balloon out and extra time. So, I would hope that the fee isn't more than the last year's fee plus the extra that has been agreed. And I'm, again, not holding to anything, but I wouldn't want to see it more than that combined level.
Yes, thank you. That does actually raise a really good point, Ross, which is I mean, we're trying to do two things with this audit process, Chris. One is that we do the right work at the right time, but I also think we need to make certain that we are maximising the efficiencies that are at all possible in the process. And I know that might be counterintuitive. We could say, well, let's go back to dashboard and emails, but that's not the way to do a proper audit, as we know. So I hear that. Leslie, I think you have a point.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chair. I was just going to say to Chris, I was rather hoping that you could at least give a percentage indication that there must be some at least thought in audit's mind about the percentage of extra complexity work that you think is going to increase the fee. As an upper level, are you talking about a 10% increase, a 20% increase?
Still don't want to prejudge a moderation position, especially when it's looking at benchmarking. Not including this one. Yeah, I can give you information, but I think I'm best to give you the right information at the right time. That's not right.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. Leslie, and I don't want to put Chris in a difficult position.
That's fine. Thanks,
but elsewhere the fees are substantial rises. And Chris's point is that actually we're dealing here with a parliamentary expectation that auditees pay the full cost of fees. They're not subsidised by the taxpayer. I think that's another point that is behind what you're saying, and you're indicating that the Auditor General feels he's held fees back for probably the thick end of about 4 years, rather than having had the gradual increase. I think the critical thing, Chris, is that we have a good audit, because that will minimise our fees rather than the issue, which we will debate later, of demands for extra fees. That's where we get hit. Yes, Tom.
Sorry, but I guess it's stating the obvious, but I mean, to the extent that you are able to influence the process through the process of moderation that you're describing, I mean, I think as a council, you know, we've got to observe that we are doing things like not cutting the grass as often. We're cutting the grass higher than we previously did. I mean, I'm just giving you one example of ways that we are trying to reduce the inflation impact on ratepayers. So although we run a business too, where it'd be great to be able to just run a cost plus, so we don't. So I'm hoping that when you get to that moderation process, you know, you bear those things in mind. I mean, I could give you a list as long as they are, the things that we're doing to try to reduce our cost.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that, and that's a key message that I still think in the middle of this, as we have made our plans, that I would want to be assured that we have, you know, it's easy and trite for me to say it, but turned every stone to work out what is done. Okay, folk, I think I'd like to keep moving unless there's more questions people would like to raise. We have in front of us, as I said, two documents, two of the three that we'd normally have. The engagement letter plus also the annual plan. So we are receiving the report. We're noting the detailed plan will allow us to report by 31 October. There's ongoing communication, and of course that's been critical for us around actually getting there. The fair value assessment, we have noted there is the new standard FRS 48. Again, this comes back to the reason why a pro forma would be great to have, and that we note that the fee for 23 through 25 is still to be received, and we're saying the next meeting that we have, so that'll be good. Importantly, we have a role to recommend that the Mayor signs the engagement letter. Do I have a mover and I think that's those all there. That's a lot. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Leslie. Is there any debate on the motion? There being none, I'll put all those in favour. Please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those against, it's carried. Thank you very much. Thanks, you gentlemen. We'll get you back in the PX later on. Appreciate your time. Right, what am I up to? My list. Oh, there's my list there. Thank you. Right, so it's time for us to move the motion to go into public excluded. and I will just find it. We have quite a number of matters, A through I. The agenda sets out the reasons why. From the chair, I'll move that we go into PX. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Grant. Is there any debate on the motion? Oh, sorry, and I also need to include in that, Grant, that we allow Derek and Chris to stay as well, too, please, by the way. Sorry, I should always take that as, thank you, Michael, keeping me safe. That we'll include that in the motion. Is there any debate on that motion? There is none. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against is carried. Thank you very much.